The first rays of dawn stretched across the alien sky, casting long shadows on the ancient crumbling ruins that dotted the landscape of the planet Zoroth. Captain Ethan Marks crouched low, blending into the dark shadows of a broken stone column. His boots pressed silently against the cool, rough surface of the ground as he studied the area in front of him. This mission should have been straightforward. He had been sent here with his team to meet the Zathral, a species of tall, sleek creatures known for their advanced technology and diplomatic skills. The meeting was supposed to be about strengthening their alliance, which had been vital for both humanity and the Zathrali in maintaining peace in the galaxy. But something didn't feel right. Ethan wasn't here because of diplomacy, though. The moment he arrived on Zoroth, his instincts had told him that this wasn't just a typical peace negotiation. The Zathrali Queen Varana had been acting strangely, too distant, too guarded. Her soldiers had been arriving in large numbers for a simple meeting, and the mood among them was tense. And then, an encrypted message had come through from Lieutenant Hale, his communications officer. Hale's message was brief, but it carried a heavy warning. There is a threat to the Queen's leadership. Be prepared. Ethan had learned long ago to trust his gut. The Zathrali were proud, calculating beings. And when they showed signs of instability, it was rarely a simple misunderstanding. There was something going on, and he had a bad feeling about it. His job wasn't to second-guess orders. His job was to protect the Queen and keep the alliance intact. But that didn't mean he was going to blindly walk into a trap, as Ethan crouched in the ruins. The quiet hum of alien technology filled the air, mixing with the faint whisper of a breeze. He could hear the low thrum of energy shields activating, the unmistakable sound of the Zathrali guards preparing for the Queen's arrival. His team was positioned nearby, each of them trained to handle any situation that might arise. But it was Ethan, as the captain, who needed to be ready for the first move. He needed to stay alert. A few moments later, the figure he had been waiting for appeared. Queen Varana, her tall, regal form silhouetted against the rising sun, walked through the temple ruins with a calmness that betrayed no hint of the turmoil that was brewing. She was as beautiful as she was dangerous. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and her eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. Her bodyguard, a group of Zathrali soldiers, followed closely behind her, their movements almost mechanical. They were a mix of towering warriors in full combat armor and sleek, silent operatives, each one carrying weapons designed for precision and deadly force. Their presence sent a clear message. No one was to approach the Queen without permission. Ethan's gaze never wavered from the Queen. She was, in every sense, a ruler who commanded respect. But something about the way her guards surrounded her sent a chill down his spine. They were too rigid, too watchful. They were not acting like protectors. They were acting like they were ready to turn on her at any moment. As Queen Varana and her guards drew closer, Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't supposed to be here for a battle. He was supposed to be here to talk, to negotiate. But the uneasy feeling gnawing at him told him otherwise. He didn't have the luxury of waiting for the situation to develop. Something was about to happen, and he needed to be prepared. The moment of tension finally arrived. A single Zathrali soldier, his armor gleaming like polished metal, broke rank and moved to stand slightly ahead of the Queen. Ethan's sharp eyes caught the subtle shift in the soldier's posture. His hand was slowly reaching for the sidearm at his waist. The human soldier reacted instinctively. Without thinking, his hand shot out, grabbing the soldier's wrist in a vice-like grip. The soldier froze, his eyes wide with disbelief as he realized he'd been caught. Ethan's voice was calm but filled with authority. "Don't do it." The soldier struggled against Ethan's grip, but it was no use. Ethan's reflexes were too fast, too precise. The soldier's weapon remained securely holstered, and Ethan wasn't about to give him a chance to pull it. The Queen's guards were trained to be deadly in combat, but the human captain was something else. He was unpredictable, calculating, and he knew how to read every situation before it unfolded. The soldier's body tensed, clearly conflicted. Behind him, the Queen's icy eyes locked onto Ethan. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a silent understanding. She had seen what just happened, and she knew that the human soldier was in control of the situation. Ethan slowly let go of the soldier's wrist. forcing him to step back. The soldier remained still, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and confusion. Ethan could hear the faint sound of energy shields humming louder as the guards shifted positions. They were waiting for something to happen, waiting for an excuse to act, but Ethan wasn't done yet. He wasn't about to let this go without getting answers. "You were going for your weapon," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "And you were about to use it. You should know better." The Zathral soldier's mouth opened to protest, but before he could speak, a calm but firm voice interrupted him. "Enough, Karan." The command came from Queen Varana. She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Ethan. The faintest flicker of something respect perhaps passed between them, but her expression remained unreadable. "Karan." The soldier lowered his head in submission. "My queen," he said, his voice filled with barely concealed resentment. The queen's attention shifted to Ethan, her gaze sharp and calculating. "I trust you have a reason for your actions, Captain Marks." Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "I was protecting you," he said simply. "I'm not here to start a fight, Your Majesty. But when someone reaches for a weapon in a place like this, I don't take chances." The queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes flickering over his face, perhaps weighing his words. Ethan could see that she was not easily swayed. She had been ruling for a long time, and she had learned to keep her emotions in check. But there was something in her expression now, something that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. "I see," she finally said. "It seems your instincts are sharper than mine, Captain." Ethan didn't say anything in response. He didn't need to. His focus was entirely on the guards now, and the subtle signs that something wasn't right. It wasn't just Karan who had been acting strangely. All of the Queen's soldiers were on edge, and that meant trouble. "I've been told that some of your people are planning a coup, Your Majesty," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "If you have any enemies in your ranks, I need to know about it." The Queen's eyes narrowed, but her lips barely moved as she replied, "You speak of rumors." "There are no enemies here, Captain. Only loyal subjects." Ethan wasn't convinced. He had seen enough to know when something was off. The Zathrali were known for their honor. But there was something about the way they moved, the way they watched him, that didn't sit right. "Then why is your guard so tense?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did Karan make a move for his weapon?" The Queen's eyes flared with sudden anger, but she quickly masked it. "I do not answer to you, human. You are here to protect me, not question my authority." Ethan could feel the shift in the air. The tension thickened, and the guards stiffened, ready for action. But Ethan wasn't backing down. If the Queen was hiding something, he was going to find out what it was. No matter the cost. The quiet hum of energy weapons filled the air as the standoff continued. The fate of the alliance between humanity and the Zathrali was on the line. And in that moment, everything depended on what happened next. Ethan stood tall, his eyes still locked on Queen Varana. He had just saved her from what seemed like an imminent attack, but something told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Zathrali Queen had handled the situation with calm authority, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a dangerous edge to the air now, a tension that was unmistakable. Karan. The guard who had tried to draw his weapon remained kneeling on the ground, his eyes cast down. Ethan could see the anger bubbling under his surface. The soldier had failed in front of his queen, and that kind of failure often didn't go unpunished in warrior cultures like the Zathrali, but Ethan wasn't worried about Karan. He had bigger concerns. The queen turned to her guard with a subtle gesture. "Stand," she ordered, her voice low, but full of command. Karan hesitated, but only for a moment. He stood and straightened his posture, although his eyes never left Ethan. There was a burning resentment in them now, a silent promise of revenge. But Ethan knew better than to be distracted by empty threats. He had dealt with more than his fair share of hostile stares. Queen Varana's gaze shifted to Ethan again, her sharp, calculating eyes scanning him like a predator watching its prey. There was no fear in her expression, but Ethan could feel the silent weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing down on him. She was sizing him up, trying to determine if he could be trusted. "I'm not sure whether you saved me or just caused a distraction." "Captain," she said coolly, her voice like ice. "But you are right about one thing, you are here to protect me."
Else.
Ethan didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing. He had only just begun to piece together the puzzle in front of him. The Queen had known something was wrong, but she hadn't fully acknowledged it. He could see it in the way she moved, the way her guards now stood at attention. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission. It had turned into a battle for control. "I didn't come here to make things harder for you." "Your Majesty," Ethan said finally, his voice calm yet steady. "But if you're hiding something from me, I need to know. The rumors about a coup aren't just whispers. I've seen the signs." The Queen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Ethan thought she might lash out, but she only tilted her head slightly. "You are persistent," she said, her voice carrying both admiration and a touch of annoyance. "I give you credit for that. But you overestimate your understanding of our people." Ethan didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that when dealing with powerful figures like Varana, you didn't show weakness. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady, "but I know enough to know that something isn't right here. The atmosphere is tense, and your guards are on edge. This isn't normal. I can feel it." The Queen studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, she stepped forward, closing the space between them. She was so tall, so imposing, that for a brief moment, Ethan felt the full weight of her presence. But he didn't back down. "Perhaps you are right, Captain," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Ethan's heart beat just a little faster. "But there are forces at work here that you cannot understand. Forces that you, as a human, will never be able to fully comprehend." Ethan's brow furrowed. He had heard something similar from the Zithrali before. They often considered themselves superior both intellectually and physically. It was part of their pride. But he wasn't going to let her dismiss him so easily. "I've seen more than my fair share of political unrest, Your Majesty. I may not understand Zithrali politics, but I know how to handle threats. And right now, I think you're surrounded by them." The Queen's eyes flickered with something. Was it regret? Or maybe it was concern. Ethan couldn't be sure. But for a moment, the Queen looked less like a ruler and more like a woman trapped in a web she couldn't escape. It lasted only a second. But it was enough to tell Ethan that he was on the right track. "Maybe I don't understand everything, but I know one thing for sure," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to protect you, not just from outside forces, but from the ones standing beside you. If I have to step in, I will." Her eyes flashed, and for a brief second, Ethan could see something almost dangerous lurking beneath her composed exterior. But it was quickly gone, replaced by her usual regal demeanor. "You think you can save me from my own people?" Queen Varana asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I don't know if I can save you," Ethan said, his tone unwavering. "But I know I'll do everything in my power to try." The Queen looked at him for a long, silent moment, her gaze as sharp as any blade. She was testing him, weighing whether to trust him fully. Ethan didn't back down. He was ready for whatever came next. "I'll tell you what I know," she said at last, her voice softer, but still filled with the weight of leadership. "There is a faction within my court that does not agree with my leadership. They seek to weaken the alliance between the Zithrali and humanity. They believe our people should stand alone, separate from the rest of the galaxy." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a political move that could shake the entire galaxy. If the Zithrali turned on humanity, it would set off a chain reaction that no one could predict. The thought alone was enough to make his stomach tighten. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but urgent. "And what are they planning?" "I don't know yet," Varana replied, her tone guarded. "But I suspect they are already making their move. The guards you see around me, they are loyal to me. But they are also divided. Some of them want to protect me, while others want to take me down. And that, Captain, is where you come in." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "I need you to help me root out this faction," the Queen said, her voice hardening. "We cannot afford to show weakness. If I am to remain in power, I need to know who is loyal and who is not. I will not allow my people to tear themselves apart over petty politics." Ethan nodded slowly. He He had expected something like this, but hearing it from the Queen herself gave it a new weight. The fate of the Zathrali and their alliance with humanity rested on what happened next. He was going to have to be careful. To navigate this web of politics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat and the strength of a soldier. If you want my help? Your Majesty, Ethan said, I'll do everything I can, but you need to trust me. And you need to start being honest with me, too. The Queen's eyes softened for just a moment. And for the first time since their conversation had begun, Ethan saw something like understanding in her gaze. I will trust you, Captain. But remember, this is no simple task. The danger is greater than you realize. I'll be ready, Ethan said firmly. I've been in worse situations before. For the first time, the Queen allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. I hope for your sake, Captain, that you are right. With that, the Queen turned and began to walk away, her guards falling into step behind her. Ethan remained where he stood, watching her carefully. The next move was his. He had no illusions about the difficulty of what lay ahead. But one thing was clear. The true battle for control was just beginning. And in this game of power, the human race was about to show the galaxy just how far their cunning and bravery could take them. Ethan's footsteps echoed across the ancient temple floor as he followed Queen Varana deeper into the heart of the ruins. Her guards flanked her, moving in perfect formation as if they were part of her shadow, ready to protect her at any moment. The silence between them was thick, as if the weight of the situation had pressed down on every word unsaid. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. The Queen's trust in him had been established, but trust was a fragile thing in times like these. The Zathrali were not a people who isolely relied on others, especially not humans. But Ethan had made it clear that his loyalty lay with her and, more importantly, with the stability of the alliance between humanity and the Zaudaw. As they walked, the captain's mind raced. The Queen's revelation had shaken him. A faction within her court was plotting against her. The Zathrali were a proud species, fiercely protective of their independence, and it seemed that not all of them wanted the peace they had worked so hard to achieve. If this faction succeeded, the galaxy would be thrown into chaos. Ethan had seen his share of political unrest, but this was something different. There was an air of danger that hung over the Queen, and it was not just from the outside. It was from within. The very people she trusted most were the ones most likely to betray her. The Queen stopped in front of an ornate door, its surface etched with ancient symbols that glowed faintly under the light of the twin suns outside. She turned to face Ethan, her expression unreadable. "This is where the council meets," she said, her voice low. "I expect it will be the site of my last stand if I am not careful." Ethan's gaze locked onto hers. "We won't let it get to that point, Your Majesty," he said firmly. "You have my word." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him with the weight of what was to come. Then after a pause, she nodded. "Come with me," she said, opening the door. "I will show you what we are up against." Inside, the room was dark, with tall columns that stretched up to a high ceiling. In the center of the room stood a round table, surrounded by tall, elegant chairs. It was a place where the Queen met with her closest advisors, those she had trusted for years. But now the room felt cold and oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in on them. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The Queen motioned for him to take a seat at the table. As he did, he felt a strange sense of foreboding wash over him. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a test. Varana seated herself at the head of the table and looked at the space around her. "These are the people I thought I could trust," she said softly. "But even I cannot see the darkness in their hearts." Ethan could hear the pain in her voice. The Queen had always been a strong leader, but now she was showing cracks in her armor. The burden of leadership weighed heavily on her. Ethan wasn't sure if it was the pressure of the rebellion or the realization that her closest allies were now her greatest threat. One by one, the doors to the council room opened, and the Queen's advisors filed in. Each of them was a representative of one of the most powerful factions of the Zathrali. They were tall, elegant beings with eyes that shimmered with intelligence and pride. But as they took their seats around the table, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The first to speak was High Advisor Corrin, a tall and imposing figure with silver skin and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. He was known for his wisdom and his influence in the Queen's court, but his voice was colder than usual. "Your Majesty," Corrin said, bowing his head slightly, "it seems that the time has come for us to make a choice. The galaxy is changing, and we must adapt. The alliance with humanity has made us stronger, but it has also made us vulnerable. There are those who believe we must focus on our own strength, on our own future." Ethan's gaze flicked to the Queen. Her face remained stoic, but he could see the tension in the lines of her jaw. Corrin's words were subtle, but they carried an edge. He was planting the seeds of doubt about the alliance. And Ethan knew that if the Queen didn't act quickly, her entire court would be divided. Queen Verana's voice was calm but firm. "I have heard these arguments before, Corrin. We have strengthened our people through our alliance with humanity. It has been a mutually beneficial partnership. The galaxy has been at peace because of it." Corrin's eyes narrowed. "Peace is fragile, Your Majesty. And humanity, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot protect us from the dangers that lie ahead. We must make our own path. We must reclaim our autonomy." Ethan could feel the temperature in the room drop. The words were carefully chosen, but they were dangerous. Corrin wasn't just questioning the alliance. He was openly calling for a break from it. If others in the room agreed, the consequences could be catastrophic. Another voice spoke up, a woman with bright green eyes and pale blue skin. "Counselor Lyra, we have done well under the Queen's leadership, but the path ahead is uncertain. Perhaps it is time to reevaluate our alliances. The Zothrelli have always been self-sufficient. We should consider forging our own destiny." The room grew quiet as Lyra's words hung in the air. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment. These were the people who held the fate of the galaxy in their hands, and right now they were divided. He couldn't let it happen. The Queen's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her anger. "You speak as though humanity is a burden to us, as though their alliance is a weakness. But I will not let anyone tear apart what we've worked so hard to build." The room fell silent, and for a moment, Ethan thought the council might finally see reason. But then, another voice spoke up. It's time from the shadows at the far end of the table. "I disagree," said a low, gravelly voice. It belonged to Advisor Turan, one of the Queen's most trusted soldiers, and a man who had fought alongside her in countless battles. But there was something unsettling in his tone. "We cannot ignore the growing influence of humanity. Their presence in the galaxy is becoming a threat. We must consider what that means for our future." Ethan's stomach tightened. Turan was no fool. He had seen enough of the galaxy's power struggles to know when someone was about to make a dangerous move. And Turan's words were far from subtle. They were a challenge. Queen Verana's eyes flashed with a cold fire. "I will not stand by and watch my people turn against each other. We are stronger, united than divided, and I will not allow fear to dictate our future." Ethan could feel the weight of the Queen's words. She was making a stand, but it was clear that the council was already split. The Zothrali were no longer united in their vision for the future. Some wanted to maintain the alliance with humanity, while others saw it as a threat to their power. The tension in the room grew thick. Ethan knew that things were about to get even more dangerous. The Queen had made her position clear, but her council was no longer loyal. There was a rift that couldn't be mended easily, and if it wasn't handled carefully, the entire alliance would crumble. But Ethan wasn't going to back down. He had seen the cracks in the Zethral leadership, and he knew that it would take more than words to fix it. There was only one way to restore the Queen's power, and that was to act quickly. Decisively and without hesitation, the Queen's eyes turned to him. And for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of hope in them. "Captain Marks," she said softly, "it is time to make a choice. Will you stand with me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Always, Your Majesty. Always." The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut through with a knife. The Queen's words had settled like a stone in the pit of Ethan's stomach. and the weight of the decision that lay ahead was heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Queen Verana had just asked him a question, one that would shape the future of the Zatharelli people and humanity's place in the galaxy. "Captain Marks," she said again, her voice calm but carrying a weight that only those who had led nations could understand, "will you stand with me? Will you help me hold the line no matter what comes next?" Ethan looked around the council room. The faces of the Queen's advisors were no longer expressions of solidarity. They were filled with doubt and suspicion. Corin, the High Advisor, was the most obvious opponent, his sharp eyes never leaving Ethan, as though he could read the human like a book, waiting for him to make a mistake. But there was something else in the air now. It wasn't just a political struggle. It was a battle for survival. "I will," Ethan said firmly, his voice unwavering. "I stand with you, Your Majesty. Humanity stands with you. If you will let us, we can help you restore order." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were unreadable, but there was a flicker of something there, hope, perhaps, or at least the faintest glimmer of trust. The other members of the council exchanged looks, whispers passing between them. Some of them were clearly unsure, but there was no turning back now. If the Queen was going to survive this political storm, she needed a strong ally, and Ethan had already made his choice. "I do not expect this to be easy," Verana said slowly, her gaze shifting between the council members. "We have always prided ourselves on our strength, but we are divided now, and that division could tear us apart. I know I can count on my loyal guards, but we must secure the loyalty of others." Ethan nodded. The gravity of her words hit him hard. If the Queen didn't act quickly and decisively, the fracture in her court could lead to a civil war. The Zathral had powerful weapons, advanced technology, and a formidable army. But none of that would matter if they lost control of their own government. He turned to the Queen. "If you have a plan, Your Majesty, I'll follow it. But you can't face this alone. We need to expose the traitors before they move against you." The Queen's face tightened, and for a brief moment, she looked vulnerable. She was not used to admitting weakness, but Ethan could see that the burden of leadership was wearing on her. The fact that she was willing to trust him with such a sensitive matter showed just how much she had come to rely on his judgment. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she said softly. "Even the ones I thought were my closest allies could be working against me." Corin's cold gaze snapped to her. "Your Majesty, you cannot trust this human. He is an outsider, someone who has no stake in Zatharelli matters. He is here only to serve his own interests. You should not lean on him too heavily." Ethan turned his gaze to Corin, meeting the advisor's eyes without flinching. The man's words were sharp, cutting, but they only fueled Ethan's resolve. He was not here for petty politics. He was here to ensure the survival of the Queen, the Alliance, and the peace they had worked so hard to establish. "I am not here for power, Corin," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I am here because the future of the galaxy is at stake. The Zatharelli and humanity have been allies for a reason. I don't plan to let that slip away over petty power struggles." Corin opened his mouth to retort, but the Queen held up her hand, silencing him. "Enough," she said sharply. "This is not the time for arguing. We must act, and we must act quickly. We cannot afford any more distractions." The room quieted, the weight of her words settling over the council like a heavy cloak. The Queen's voice was commanding, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Ethan saw a spark of the leader who had united the Zatharelli in the first place. She was still in controls. She just needed the right support to hold on to that control. "Here is what we will do," Verana said, her voice gaining strength. "We will begin with Corin. His faction has always been one of the most powerful. If we can sway him, the others will follow. But we must be careful. If he suspects any move against him, it will be too late." Ethan nodded. "I understand. And what about the others? The ones we don't know about?" The Queen's expression hardened. "We will move cautiously. Trust must be earned, but we cannot wait forever. If this faction is as large as I believe, we will have to take a more direct approach. I'm prepared to make hard choices, Captain." Ethan could sense the steel in her voice. She was ready to fight for her throne, but this wasn't just about power. It was about survival. The Queen was not the kind of leader to go down without a battle, and Ethan admired her strength. "I'm ready when you are," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "Let's do this." The Queen gave him a sharp nod. "First, we must gather information. I'll send out loyal agents to observe Corrin's movements. He's been meeting with the dissenters more frequently, and if we can catch him in the act, we'll have the evidence we need to expose him." Ethan thought for a moment. "We should also send a team to watch his inner circle. Anyone he trusts could be compromised." The Queen agreed. "Exactly. We need to find the weak links and expose them before Corrin can act. Once we have enough evidence, we will present it to the rest of the council. If they see what Corrin is doing, they will have no choice but to stand with us." The Queen turned to her chief advisor, Lyra, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. "Lyra, you will handle the logistics. I need you to coordinate with the agents and make sure we have everything in place. We cannot afford any mistakes." Lyra nodded, her face tense but focused. "Understood, Your Majesty. I will begin preparations immediately."
"Good," the Queen said.
She turned back to Ethan, "And you, Captain, will stay by my side. I need you with me when we confront Corrin. Your presence will make a statement. We are not alone in this." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I'll be there." The Queen stood, her eyes steady. Then it settled. "We move forward tonight." As Ethan left the council room, the weight of the Queen's plan settled on his shoulders. He had been thrust into the heart of the Zethrali political struggle, but he didn't mind. The stakes were too high to back out now. He knew that what was coming would not be easy. The Zethrali were powerful, but the traitors within their ranks were dangerous. And no matter how strong the Queen's leadership was, she couldn't fight this battle alone. But with Ethan's help and the loyalty of those who still supported her, there was a chance to save the Alliance. And with it, the peace they had worked so hard to build. But as the doors closed behind him, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The dark of the night had settled over Zorith, and the palace was quiet, save for the steady hum of its advanced systems running silently in the background. The once bright halls of the Queen's stronghold were now bathed in shadow, their stone walls cold and silent. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Queen Varana had made her choice, and now the time had come to act. Ethan stood in a dimly lit chamber beside the Queen, the weight of the night's task pressing down on him. The Zethrali were an ancient race, known for their intelligence, their power, and their sense of pride. But tonight, that pride would be tested. Tonight, their future would be decided. The Queen had gathered her most loyal advisors, those who still believed in her leadership. They had formed a plan to expose Corrin and his traitorous faction before they could strike. But it wasn't just about exposing Corrin's betrayal. It was about taking back control from the shadowy forces that had worked against her from within. The stakes were higher than ever. Varana stood in front of a large map, her eyes scanning it as she traced the movements of her enemies. Corrin and his supporters are meeting tonight. It will be the perfect opportunity to strike. We need to move swiftly, without hesitation. Ethan nodded, his mind sharp and focused. "I'll be ready, but we need to make sure we're not walking into a trap. Corrin won't hesitate to use force if he feels cornered." The Queen's eyes met his. There was no fear in her expression, only determination. "If he tries to fight back, we will fight back harder. I will not let my people fall into chaos because of one man's greed." The plan was simple, but dangerous. Ethan would lead a small team of elite soldiers, humans, and Zethrali loyalists, look into the heart of the traitors' faction. They would confront Corrin and his inner circle, exposing their plot and forcing them to surrender without bloodshed. But if things went wrong, if Corrin's forces were too strong, or if his rebellion had already spread too far, the consequences would be catastrophic for the first time. Ethan felt the full weight of what he was doing. The Queen's trust was not something he could take lightly. She was relying on him, not just as a protector, but as a partner in this fight. And if he failed, everything they had worked for, the alliance between humanity and the Zethrali, the peace they had built, could be shattered. The team moved silently through the corridors of the palace. Ethan's boots made no sound on the polished floors as he led the way, his hand hovering near the weapon at his side. He could hear the faint whispers of his team behind him, their breathing steady. Each one prepared for what was to come. The air was thick with anticipation. As they reached the meeting hall, Ethan signaled for them to stop. He glanced at the Queen, who stood a few steps behind him, flanked by her guards. Her face was calm, but Ethan could sense the tension in her posture. "Remember," he said quietly, "we expose them. We don't kill them, at least. Not unless it's absolutely necessary." The Queen nodded. "I know. But they will answer for what they've done." Ethan turned back to the entrance. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was it. The moment of truth had arrived. The doors to the meeting hall were large and imposing, their metal frames gleaming under the low lights. Ethan stepped forward and pushed them open, his team following closely behind. Inside, the scene was exactly as he had feared. Corin and several of his most trusted followers stood around a large table, deep in conversation. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Corin turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw the Queen and her forces standing in the doorway. His lips curled into a tight smile. But it was clear that there was no warmth behind it. "I was wondering when you would show up, Your Majesty," Corin said, his voice cold and filled with disdain. "It seems you've finally come to confront me." The Queen stepped forward, her gaze hardening. "This is not a confrontation, Corin. This is a reckoning." The tension in the room was palpable. Corin's eyes flicked to the other members of his faction who had already begun to reach for their weapons. But they were too slow. Ethan's team was already in position, weapons drawn and ready. The Queen's loyalists stood tall beside her, prepared to fight if necessary. "Corin," the Queen said, her voice steady, "you and your supporters have betrayed not only me, but all of Zathrali. The alliance with humanity was never a weakness. It was our strength. And now you have put everything at risk." Corin scoffed, but his eyes betrayed him. Ethan could see the fear behind his bravado. "You think you can win this, Your Majesty? You are outnumbered. Your people are already questioning your leadership. I have already secured my power. And once I'm in control, humanity will be discarded, and the Zathrol will be free once again." Ethan took a step forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're wrong, Corin. The Zathrol may be proud, but they are not fools. They know that peace with humanity is the only way forward. And you," Ethan's eyes locked onto Corin's, "are nothing but a traitor to your people." For a moment, there was silence. Corin's face twisted with anger, but then he stepped back, signaling to his followers. "Then let's see who is truly in control, Captain Marks," he said coldly. At his signal, the room erupted into chaos. The traitors moved with lightning speed, but Ethan's team was faster. The Zathrali loyalists fought with precision, blocking the traitors' attempts to draw weapons. Ethan was in the thick of it, his training kicking in as he took down one of Corin's men in a single, fluid motion. But the fight wasn't just physical, it was also psychological. As the traitors saw how quickly their comrades were being subdued, their resolve began to crack. Corin, realizing that his plan was falling apart, made one last desperate move. He reached for a hidden weapon beneath his cloak. But before he could draw it, the Queen's guards were on him. Their weapons trained on his chest. "Corin, your rebellion ends tonight," the Queen said coldly, her voice filled with finality. "You will answer for your actions." Corin's face twisted with fury, but there was no escape. His faction had crumbled, and he had no choice but to surrender. His followers, seeing their leader defeated, began to lower their weapons. The fight draining from them, Ethan stepped forward, his eyes still locked on Corin. "You've lost. The Zathrali will not follow you. Your plans are over." Corin said nothing, his eyes filled with hatred and defeat. But deep down he knew that Ethan was right. His rebellion had failed. The Queen's leadership would stand as the traitors were taken away in chains. Ethan stood by the Queen, watching as her people began to regroup. The battle was over. But the war for the Zathrali's future was just beginning. The Queen turned to him. Her expression, a mix of relief and gratitude. "We've done it, Captain. The Alliance is safe for now." Ethan nodded, his expression steady. For now, your majesty, but this is only the beginning. There are still enemies out there within your own people and beyond. Verana's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a fire in them, now one of determination. Then we will fight, Captain. Together. Ethan stood tall beside her. The Queen had emerged victorious, and so had humanity. Together they had struck down the traitors and secured the future of their people. And for the first time since arriving on Zoroth, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The battle had been won, but the journey was far from over.